Joseph Carlson. This is episode 21 of The Grief of Politics. I'm joined once again by Evan Carroll.
Doing
Evan,
good. Good morning.
How are you doing? Yeah, so this episode we're going to talk about water because it has been in the news a lot. I don't know if we're going to disagree about this or have any. This was actually very informative, like these articles, and I think the one thing, we'll get to that, but what were your initial kind of, I don't know, reading these articles, what were your initial kind of takeaways, thoughts,
So,
stuff like that?
I think at least at some level, a lot of people are really aware of what's going on. And maybe that's just my own perception because I am. But the surprising thing to me in this was how complicated the rules and laws are around this. And how difficult it's going to be to find a resolution because so many people have legal claim to a specified amount of water that just isn't going to be there anymore.
Right, and I forgot to update the articles, but there was an update in the National Review article that we're going to bring up. They talk about these states have to come together and like reduce 20 million gallon, whatever. They have to reduce their water usage, and there was an update that they were not able to reach an agreement, and so now the government has to step in and say we're going to have to do this because they couldn't come to
Which
agreement.
Is what I expected after reading these articles, so I'm not surprised that's the follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, we've talked offline about different documentaries you watch on Netflix, and I've watched, like, I know it's John Oliver, but, like, they do have a research team, and they did research about how you can, basically the way the water rights are set is you could do whatever you want, and so, like you said, it's very complicated where if it's first come, first serve, and you've been doing that since the beginning of when water rights started, new construction is starting up everywhere, and then it's like, I've been thinking about it a lot, being in Washington State and, being in construction. I see a lot of new construction, and I've been to places that are drier lately, like Eastern Washington. I'm like, where are they getting this? You know what I mean? Like, where is this? Like, reading these articles makes me more aware of water. Like, it makes me suspect my neighbor's sprinkler system when it's going to rain in the spring and be green, and everybody around him has just a brown yard because we've all just accepted like this is life, and he's like, no, I'm gonna water my lawn. I'm like, what's the I don't know. I'm not mad at my neighbor, but it makes you more aware when you see those sprinklers go off, and especially when the sensors on them are broken and we get like drizzle or rain in the morning and they go off anyway, and you're like, what in the world is
along those lines, right? Like there's things you have to be aware of too. Like I think culturally in Washington, we just assume there's an unlimited supply of water in Western Washington. When it was 2015, I had a customer come through. I was working for Sprint, and I had a customer come through whose husband was a underwater welder. Like, oh wow, so like he's doing oil rigs and stuff. And she's like, no, he's welding pipelines up in the mountains right now to bring in water. I'm like, what? And so when their order came in and they came in together to upgrade their phones, and I'm remembering from 7 years ago, and I'm probably ad-libbing, but the essential piece that I took away from it is that Washington State was in a level of drought, and they were building these pipelines to help build reservoirs up in the mountains because, to bring water to Western Washington, because despite the fact that we think that we are in a state of unlimited water, we really aren't. Now, it's Washington, right? Like our version of, oh man, we don't have unlimited water is completely different than Arizona, but still.
Or like in that National Review article or the other ones we've read, like
California,
Arizona,
Nevada,
like I said, Texas, California, like these. There's this bunch of states in the Southwest that get a lot of their water from the Colorado River, and like Lake Mead is a reservoir and stuff like that.
Exactly. And you're talking about the first come, first serve. One of the other really interesting things on this is like, I've always understood water rights was like the first person to get the water rights had the water rights. But it sounds like with Lake Mead and the Colorado River, in 1920s, I think it was, or maybe it was the 19 teens. There was this big, huge agreement between all these different states that like you'll get this much, and you'll get this much, and you'll get this much, and so it was all allocated and specified. And I believe it was the National Review article. And then they mentioned that the year that they did that was like a year of monumental water flows. It was like a 500-year high.
Right. So they're basing everything that they're doing on that.
And yet,
old, from the 1900s.
Everyone has legal claim to this specified amount of water. They've all got these different various contracts and agreements that, oh, wait, that water's not there. So, yeah, I expected it to be ugly. When you say that there was an update, the government's going to have to step in 100%. Not surprised at all.
Yeah, it's 5 states.
Yeah.
It's like 5 states. And then, on top of it, I saw a news thing, like an actual interview, and they said one thing that they didn't take into account, or they're just starting to, or at least with this council, was Native American rights. So the tribes are coming up saying, hey, what about us? You know, like we also need water. And so it's just a mess. But I think I'll start, we'll get to the National Review article. That was very interesting. But I think the one I want to start with is just the water cycle article. So it's from NASA. So I thought this was like a very...
And this one's old. NASA. This is 12 years old.
Yeah, it sucks, but I will say they lay out in charts how everything's breaking down. And I remember years ago someone asking me, we were just talking about, his wife was a teacher, and he said she got a question on one of her, or a student posed a thing on one of his, I forget what grade it was, but he posed a question on his thing of like, is water a renewable resource? And I was like, I never thought of that. And like you said, especially here, we just think that it is just totally, this is what's going to happen. We're always going to have water. We're always going to have rainfall. Mm-hmm. It's always going to...
We're famous for it.
But I think with this... Right. And yeah, us in Oregon are like, but yeah, this article really lays out that, like I'll read, I'm not going to read the intro paragraph, but the second paragraph of this article, it's from earthobserver.nasa.gov. Like Avin said, it was published on October 1st, 2010. And it just, they don't really have who, I think it's just the team wrote, like whoever the team was that did this. But anyway, it says the second paragraph, or third, second paragraph says, they're just talking about water flow. And they say, for example, as the lower atmosphere becomes warmer, evaporation rates will increase, resulting in an increase in the amount of moisture circulating throughout the troposphere, which is the lower atmosphere. An observed consequence of higher water vapor concentration is the increased frequency of intense precipitation events, mainly over land areas. Furthermore, because of warmer temperatures, more precipitation is falling as rain rather than snow. So you and I are like, I'm pretty dumb when it comes to stuff, but I know that snowpack, obviously in the summer, will affect your water thing from like Rainier, and we just talked about, bringing water down. And then it says right here, in parts of the northern hemisphere, an earlier arrival of spring-like conditions is leading to earlier peaks in snowmelt and resulting river flows. As a consequence, seasons with the highest water demand, summer and fall, are being impacted by a reduced availability of fresh water. So the whole natural resource thing, or renewable resource of water, as we're kind of talking about this is what's happening. It's not just the idea that we're running out of water, which is one thing, or it's a drought, which, a drought could end, right? It's the idea that this natural system of water flow we are interrupting it. And so we're not going to actually have water. Like, it's literally just evaporating, as opposed to the natural cycle of, snow melt and stuff like that. And to me, all the other stuff we're going to talk about is important, but that, for me, was just mind-blowing. That like, oh, we're like affecting the cycle. Like, it's not just everything warming, it sucks. It's going to rain finally at Lake Mead, and it's going to, the Colorado River. It's like, no, that's out. Unless we do something, that's. I mean, we have talked about
But
climate change before, and
the thing is, if you're looking at the models with climate change, I mean, one, right off the bat, we know there's a natural factor to it. Two, the standing theory, and it's pretty broadly accepted, is that with the addition of all the extra carbon, particularly with fossil fuel burning that we've done, coal for decades and decades, and now cars that have been doing it forever, and we're actually getting better at cars, we're improving. But if you're looking at those models, we've already made an impact. Like if Lake Mead going down is climate change, which we're assuming it is in this conversation, then right, like we're a long way off from us making change that makes a difference. So other solutions have to come up, and I think.
I think you said it best last night. We were Avin and I hung out last night like normal people instead of on Zoom, and we were talking about like what are we going to talk? Oh yeah, because we had to postpone the episode, and I said yeah, we're going to talk about water, and I remember your second response to that, or your response to that was it's kind of bleak, like it's kind of bleak, and I go yeah, like when I started researching this, I got real down when I was like reading this like you said, it's like we're making an impact.
There was something
hard,
really interesting though, in reading through the National Review article again, since read this last month and then we changed topics.
Yeah, I did too. I was skimming it.
There's a gentleman that they interview. I don't remember his name, so I was trying to find that. But he's kind of an expert on this stuff. And I apologize for my head dodging around because I've got to scroll down to find this. But one of the things he talks about is like other parts of the world that are already really struggling with this, that are like talking about water quotas and stuff like that.
Well, again, I didn't update these articles, but China had to, in parts of China, shut down factories because of river flow. Like riverbeds were drying up, and they had to send people home. It was so hot, so like the water was just literally evaporating. And then there's been flooding in Pakistan that's killed, I think, 1,000 people to date, and they said it's going to take months to clean up, the devastation.
All right, so this guy's last name is Fleck. I don't remember his first name. But one of the things he talks about is, everyone's talking about catastrophe, and in the news cycle, right, like they want catastrophe. This is a big deal. We want people to be worried. In the world of climate science, and I think one of the reasons there's so much resistance to climate science is, of course, climate scientists have developed this operating theory that, and probably true, we have to scare people into making change, and so we've sort of got to catastrophize everything that we talk about. John Fleck.
I mean, I don't.
So let me finish my point, and then I'll let you come back to it.
Oh, cool.
Because I don't want to lose it.
No, yeah.
So what Mr. Fleck here talks about is that in other parts of the world that are already going through these drought situations and water shortage situations, I think South Africa recently went through it, Johannesburg, and some others, is that people adapt to the level of water that they have available to them. And so they're finding that these places are like, oh, people stop watering their lawns. Oh, people start recycling water where they can do it. And so as the amount of water that's available gets restricted, there is an adaptation process. One of the other things we're going to see is, and it's talked about in climate change, climate science a lot, is climate migration. You're going to see people move away from areas that have become arid and move to places that aren't.
But then that's going to affect those systems.
Correct.
That are in
100%. And that's part of what they're talking about here, too, in the NASA paper on kind of the water cycle, the global water cycle, and how climate change will impact that, is that parts of the world are going to become more dry and parts of the world are going to become more wet. One of these articles, I think, discusses how, and I think it again is the National Review article, which is by far the longest one. So when we come to that, they talk about Lake Michigan being like overfull,
low,
because they're getting more water.
One of them was low, but right. I was thinking of Lake.
Salt Lake's low. And I read a really interesting article on that. I should have sent it to
Yeah.
you, that they're beginning to get these, I don't remember what they're called now, but they're basically like super fragile, like salt mounds that grow out of the briny water. When the water gets to a certain level, the condition gets right. So if you've ever grown like salt crystals at home for a science experiment, or sugar crystals, the same kind of thing's happening.
I think for school, maybe.
And they're beginning to see more of those around the lake as the water level comes down. So it was pretty interesting. But, I mean, yeah. So the whole point I was getting at was, he was like, hey, look, like, we don't need to panic as much as the news is making it sound. It's important. We need to adapt, and we need to come up with better systems and processes. But, like, we're not all going to die tomorrow.
No, I mean, it is what. I mean, that's true, but I think there's validity in both those, because I think what happens is a lot of climate scientists are like, oh, there's still hope and all this stuff. But then you hear like a lot of people going, we need to do something now. And the argument I've heard for the alarmist thing is this causes people to act. If you just say, we'll be fine, then people are like, oh. Okay,
which is exactly why I say, like, I understand why it gets done, but I think that in certain aspects of human psychology, that the world is falling and then the world doesn't fall, creates a I don't trust you because you lied to me. So it's boy that cried wolf syndrome.
I didn't. Okay. Right. What?
Which may or may not be.
I understand. I think. Yeah. Yeah, the syndrome. Yeah, we know it as a phrase, not a syndrome. I think for me, there was something I didn't include because it was a longer podcast, that somebody just actually talked about this in one of the progressive podcasts I listened to, and he had a really interesting theory, and I've heard this with different people, not just conservatives, but the idea of like, well, look at what India is doing for pollution, and look at what China is doing for pollution, and look at what Texas is doing, and it happens on both sides. But his point was, we don't treat human life equally. Like, if we were to just look at it as a human problem of, well, yeah, of course we need to help China clean up their air. That will generally clean up our air. We all breathe the same air. We look at it as, well, they need to clean up their yard before I clean up my yard. And he said that is part of what we need to change. The thinking of, no matter what you feel about China and the government and all that,
but there's a tipping point in that. Like, already the West is dramatically ahead of India and China. Like, dramatically ahead. If you look at the actual numbers on a per capita basis, like, China and India dwarf Western countries in carbon production and emission. So eventually we have to get to the point where we're like, guys, look, like, we're way down the road and you're not even going. Hurry up.
Yeah, no, but the thing is, it's like he said, we need to look at this as a holistic thing instead of just, screw them, whatever they need. Like, we're not gonna help them or anything. They need to. It's like, no, we all need to like work towards this goal of, doing something, towards this happening. And I guess this is a good time probably to bring up the National Review article.
This article we've been referencing the whole time. We're finally gonna actually.
Yeah, we're actually gonna talk about it. I will say. It was the longest article we read. I skimmed it this morning.
Compared to the others.
One thing this is the third. Okay, so yeah, this is from the National Review. It came out on July 11th, 2022. It's called Running Dry in the American West. And it talks about, I think there's a third paragraph. They said basically Lake Mead is in drought. And it said the drought is especially pronounced in the Colorado River Basin, which supplies water to 40 million people across 9 states and irrigates 4 million acres of farmland. Water levels in Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the basin's 2 largest reservoirs, have dropped to their lowest levels since they were filled in the early to mid 20th century. In response, the federal government recently issued its first formal shortage declaration for that river, triggering mandatory water level reductions to Arizona and Nevada. Additional cutbacks are likely to come soon. The region's water supply has plummeted to levels unanticipated even just a few years ago. At the start of the 21st century, Lake Mead and Powell were nearly full. Now both are below 30% capacity. If water levels drop much farther, officials warn the dam's turbines will no longer be able to generate electricity, creating additional power supply challenges for a region already at elevated risk of rolling blackouts. This summer, because of extreme heat and increased reliance on intermittent wind and solar energy, and if they decline farther, still the reservoirs could reach Deadpool conditions, which I didn't know that was not just a Marvel hero, but actually a technical term for no water, in which the water is unable to flow downstreams from the dams. And then it talks about how it's being felt across the West and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's bad. And you know, again, the government had to step in and say, like you said, it makes sense. There's 5 states and then the tribes, the tribal considerations. And so the government had to step in and say, now we have to make a determination on what we're going to do for the shortage, basically. So, I don't know what else to say. What else did we've been talking about this article. Was there something else you wanted to bring up? I
think the really big takeaways out of this one, the couple things that we've already mentioned, right? That a lot of the water laws in the Western U.S. Are 100 years old. They're based off of false assumptions. I think this article does a pretty good job of highlighting, like, climate operates in cycles that are well beyond an individual's life. So it's hard for us to put into perspective the long-term impacts of these things. And
yeah, you and I've talked about it before that, like, we're very bad about looking into the future and, like, kind of future-proofing ourselves. We have to have, everybody, it doesn't matter politically or whatever, whoever you are, it's very hard to look ahead and say this will be a problem. It's very easy when the problem is in front of you. To go,
exactly. And so, right, like, we have these 100-year-old laws that were written steadfast. Like, they are firm. There is no, what happens if there's a drought year? Or 5? Right? Yeah. So now we're making it super difficult. So when new rules, laws, legislation come into effect, they need to be adaptive and flexible. Maybe like percentages of available water as opposed to guarantees of amount. And that sucks for state, city, municipal governments because they can't budget. And governments operate on set budgets. I mean, how often do we hear the stories of, well, if you don't spend your money, you're not going to get it next year in your budget. So what do you do with water when it's different every single year?
Yeah, and also it's a lot of states are like, well, this is going to affect tax revenue because if we're not able to build, we're not able to bring people into the state for
agriculture. Commerce, right? I think is the biggest thing to consider in that too, right? Like if you can't grow crops and sell crops, you're not going to be able to tax the production from the farms, which, as I say that, I'm like, oh man, that sounds awful. I mean, just all the news that we have about farmers struggling in the country. Maybe another article or thing for us to put down is the struggles of the, small American farmer.
Oh, well, you text me with what
next episode, but just wanted to put down on a list. We have a list, guys, that we keep track of different things we want to talk about. That might be a good one.
Do you want me to just put farmers down?
Yeah,
because I have a list of. Because that way we always forget, so I try to make a...
I mean, you want to talk about people that have some grief in their life. Talk about the small American farmer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. I mean, we call this a grief of politics, but, like, there's interviews with people that are living in places without water. And, Mississippi just had a big thing with clean water. It's the most... Besides air, it is the most basic need that humans have. Air and water. And if we don't have those two things, and like you said, there's going to be migration. Like people are going to have to upend their lives and try to find somewhere that they maybe can't afford just because it's got water. You
need water to live, right? Like you figure out how to make it work. I think humans are ingenious. I think we're super smart, and we have great technology, and we're very good at solving problems. I think we'll get really creative at fixing stuff, but it's going to be expensive. It's not going to be cheap. But I don't think, I I don't think it's going to be as horribly catastrophic as we think it could be, but it is an incredibly big deal that needs a lot of attention. And I also think this is a challenge that I believe transcends politics, because California politicians are going to struggle with this and their constituents the same exact way as Arizona politicians or Texas politicians, right? Like, all of them need water, and all of them are going to fight tooth and nail for it for their area. And no one can ignore it. I mean, there's just a reality. There's only so many gallons.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say is, aside like the hopeful part you were talking about earlier, recently California had like a very hot day. It was like, I think, triple digits, and they asked people. They sent out a text alert and asked people to turn their ACs up, basically. You know, so instead of 75, turn them to like 82. And people did. Later, I guess after the event, they released a chart of energy usage, and when they set out the text, within a few minutes, people reduced what they did. So like you said, the hopeful thing, if you tell people, hey, you need to reduce the amount of water you use, and these are the hours you can use water, in a state, people will do the right thing and say, okay, I need to cut back. And I saw an actual debate between a progressive and a conservative talking about this point. The conservatives really hitting the fact that, 82 is unacceptable. The grid almost failed. And the progressive came back in the debate. It's Breaking Points. I really like Breaking Points. They're really balanced, I think. They're on YouTube. They were part of... Well, anyway, I've talked about them a lot. But Crystal, the liberal progressive, her thing was, no, but like, you're kind of bearing the lead, because the highlight of the story should be that people did the right thing. They asked them. They didn't pass a law or restrict anybody or do a rolling brownout. They said, please do this, and people did. They said, oh yeah, and Sagar, the conservative, was like, well, 82 is unacceptable. Avin, you and I have both been in 82-degree heat. If I had to turn my AC to 82 as opposed to 105, I would take the 82 any day over the 105 that it was, or however hot it was in California.
There's people that are heat sensitive where 82 is going to be really hard.
But yeah, no, that's true.
But the vast majority of people, 82 is uncomfortable but livable. And then for a lot of people, 82 is just sweet.
Yeah, you mean the cooling trend that is...
My friends in Texas, 82?
And, another thing I heard... yeah, they're like, popping... Yeah, they're popping the poppers and everything, all the confetti poppers. Another thing I thought that was hopeful from like a progressive, where he was talking about... It was another podcast I listened to, and he talked about how it was some activist and stuff, and he said, well, a lot of people, especially the progressive side, he said, the one thing I hate is they will always say, like, well, what are... Like, the oil companies will say, oh, you can make a difference, and why don't you recycle more and you reduce what you do, which you need to do. But then a lot of progressives point out, like, well, all these big companies are really polluting at a massive scale. And his counterpoint was, yes, all that is true. There's 8 companies or 7 companies that produce polluting at this massive scale and burning coal and all this stuff, and it sucks. But if you get on a solar grid or a Tesla battery, or use some kind of smaller wind turbine, or do like water reclamation in states, is some states is legal, sometimes it's kind of murky, collecting rainwater to use. He said, yes, it's true that like maybe the one person isn't going to do a lot, but if you're doing something to... You're lost back. Me. Am I back? Because we're still... Okay. Anyway, his point was every little bit counts. And if one person is able to get off the grid, use solar to alleviate the system and maybe sell some of that energy back to the grid, and maybe use less drinking water through water reclamation and like a pump or, whatever you can do to alleviate the problem is still good.
The problem you run into is again, like laws and rules around water rights and water use are really weird in different places. So it's hard to do it. Like here in Washington, rain barrels, I think, is like illegal or only legal to a certain amount, unless those rules have changed. Of which, right, like, okay, so I have a couple rain barrels and I use that water to water my plants throughout the rest of the year, and that's all I'm really using it for, but that's reducing my watering in the summer and my water bills and drain on the system throughout the rest of the year. Like, why is that a big deal? It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, plus on my utility bill, there's drain water. Like it's a line item on my utility bill of like the
Yeah.
it's sewage basically. It's a nice way to put sewage, but if you're using less water,
And
or whatever,
like
so.
on the solar argument, right? Like the more people we can get to use solar, the less drain we have on the grid in those time frames, and it provides a bigger buffer. But solar's only good to so much. YouTuber that we both like, you introduced me to him, the Undecided channel.
Oh, Matt Undecided. I just call him Matt Undecided. I don't know actually his last name, so I feel bad for him.
He did,
but it's Matt.
he did a whole episode on the energy savings he saw with his solar he put on his home in Michigan over the course of 4 years. And it just highlighted to me, like, we here in Washington, how cheap our electricity is. Like, he was going to break even, what was it, like 7 years or something on his solar in Michigan? And he wasn't producing a giant amount, but he was going to break even on it. Us here in Washington, our electric is so cheap by comparison to the rest of the country because we use so much hydro, that, like, from a monetary standpoint, solar never pays off. So you've got to have another reasoning to want to do it. But it does pay off eventually, but it takes a long time.
I'll send you. He has a new video out that I wanted to send you where, it's just a technology issue of like solar panels aren't as efficient as we want them to be. But there's a new technique that scientists are literally building like a frame of prisms, of little individual prisms that they can retrofit your solar panel with, and that ups the efficiency by at least another 30 or 40%. Because what is it doing? Instead of you having to move the panel with the light or tilt it in a degree that hits the most amount of light, since it's a prism, whatever the light is, it's just hitting the prism and bouncing around. So it's more energy efficient. And I'll send you the video, but he did a whole breakdown of it. I guess you don't, from what I remember, you don't have to create a new panel. This is just something you put on top of your panels. And so the material is cheap. And if they're retro, it's obviously cheaper because you don't have to have a motor to move your panels to go with the sun.
Vast majority of people never do that, right? Like, we try to get our panels on our roof affixed to the right angle for the best as we can.
He brought that up in the video that this is the angle that most states go with. Or like this state, it's this, and obviously because where you are in the hemisphere. But he said this somewhat alleviates that because, again, it's a prism and it just traps more light into the system. And I'll send it to you. But he said it's things like this that are hopeful, that like it's kind of a stopgap instead of building a whole new technology.
I mean, ultimately, that's a completely different conversation. But I mean, it brings up the whole, like you said, every single little bit helps. And in the case of water, right, like not watering your lawns, that makes a difference. Replacing your dishwasher and your washer and dryer with more efficient, less water using units, like front loaded washer and dryer.
Yeah, and it's been brought up many times that like using a dishwasher saves a lot of gallons of water. Like, a lot of people like to do it by hand. It's like, stop doing your dishes by hand.
It seems counterintuitive if you're not thinking about how a dishwasher works, because it seems like a dishwasher is using a lot of water the way it goes, but it just reuses the same soapy water and then rinses, and it does all of them at the same time. So it's using the same rinse water at the same time. So it's way more efficient when you understand how the system works. But you can get more efficient dishwashers. You can get more efficient washers for your laundry. And as I just said, like front loaders are use less water, use less detergent. So there's other things that each and every one of us can do to improve our efficiency with water, but there's only so far we can go. We need water to cook. We need water to drink, to live.
Again, it's a basic, that and air, or like the two basic.
So there's only so much that like the average person can do. Take shorter showers, wash less laundry, and in aggregate, on the West Coast, if you were to go, I don't know, 80 million, 90 million people on the West Coast, we'll just use as an example, California, Oregon, and Washington. Mm-hmm. If every one of us took a 1 minute shorter shower and stopped watering our lawns, like, we'd save a ton of water.
Yeah, like you said, every little bit counts, and like I definitely would want to see that Matt Undecided to shout
Yeah,
out Matt Undecided again.
to
He
totally tag
is.
that in the
He said
description.
I don't know if he's planning to. We should. I'll put a link to his, but I have that ability. But he will. He said I don't know if he's planning to move or whatever, but he's planning to go zero everything. Like
Him and his wife are building a new home that's
solar, like
net
100%.
zero.
That's what it is. That's what it is. Yeah, he wants to be net zero, which just blew me away. And I want to see if he can do it. I definitely want to follow his journey. It'll be a few years, obviously.
No, they're pretty close.
Years,
On that one, on the video where he's talking about like the 4-year energy savings on the solar grid or on the solar install on his home, he talks about like they're going to be moving before they hit their 7-year threshold. But I believe he made it sound like they were going to be moving within the next 6 months to a year. Like they're doing pretty good. Net zero homes are actually becoming far, far, far more possible. You do a combination of like home battery backup, LED lighting, like lower energy uses appliances and stuff. There's a lot of that stuff out there. He was already talking about, we looked at the phase change insulation stuff that you sent me.
Which is pretty crazy.
So again, we're just going to plug this channel. If you guys haven't checked it out, check the description.
No, I think
Joe will share the YouTube description when he posts the YouTube channel.
I'll share his channel. One thing I do, I think it just goes back to this message of hope we talked about earlier, where you read this article on water scarcity, and like me, it was a rough, like I did this dirt like right before the weekend, and it was like a downer. Like my wife's like, "You all right?" I'm like, "I don't know, man.
We're all gonna die of dehydration,"
and well, we're all spoilers out. That's gonna happen anyway. But yeah, you want to be here as long as possible. You know what I mean? Like, but his channel is very hopeful with new technologies, and like it's a good pick me up after you've read about how terrible water rights are and how we're all gonna run out of water. To watch his video and go, no, here's how we. I think he's really focused on energy, which is good. I really would like him to do a video on like water reclamation, or like if he's doing this net zero home, I would like to see how the water cycle or his water
furthering down kind of that line, bringing us back into the water realm, right? The
sounds like a Zelda
the technologies around water recycling and water reclamation are already there. I did not share with you the article, and now that I think about it, I should have. I saw an article this week that was talking about there was a huge breakthrough in increasing the efficiency of desalination. So coastally, being able to get water out of the ocean is very expensive, which is why it's not something we do, because it takes a lot of energy. Yeah. But there was a massive breakthrough that like reduced the amount of energy needed to desalinize ocean water, like by orders of magnitude from what I took. Now, I didn't read the full article. I didn't share it, so I don't want to go too far in it. But I mean, that's just another area where we have more hope in that capacity, right? The challenge we run into is if we keep taking water out of the water cycle en masse, then we're interrupting the cycle, and it changes where it moves and how it works. And there's always ramifications of water.
That was one thing.
There's only so much of it. It fills a finite space. Right. When you take it from somewhere, it doesn't go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's that's one thing I had about the reclamation. A question I had about the reclamation, like if you're just taking rainwater,
which, if I understand correctly, is the whole reasoning behind the rules in Washington around rain barrels. Because that water that you capture in a rain barrel, if too many people do it, doesn't flow into the system. It doesn't replenish aquifers. It doesn't hit streams.
There's no
rivers.
Water.
It might be related to like salmon habitat. I don't know. I'd need to look into it more in depth. I probably sound like an idiot to someone who knows what's going on here. And if you do know, like, leave a comment, send us a message. Be super interested to know.
Please, yeah. I'll announce all that I should do in the beginning, but I'll do it in the end. But another thing I think is a new technology. I think that we're something that I've heard a little bit about, and we do it on mass scale, which is water recycling. So we have like a water treatment plant. That may be something that I don't know. That's one thing I didn't research for this. If it happens, if it could happen on a smaller scale, like per home.
It can.
So you have, just when I go to a job site, they have potable water and non-potable water of like hey, use this
It's called
for
gray water.
sewage, wash, yeah, that kind of stuff. And then here's your clean drinking water coming in. And since we're, recycling all this non-potable water, you're using a quarter of your fresh water or whatever for cooking and drinking, and then everything else.
Haven't talked about that, or haven't talked about this a whole lot on the podcast. But as a kid, we spent several years living on a boat, and
nice.
When you live on a boat, like gray water is a thing because you only have so much water you can haul on your boat. You got limited space, limited weight.
Right.
And so gray water is a big deal, which is basically like your leftover from showering, wash the dishes, other stuff. Like you filter out the particulates, and then you use that for things that don't require clean water, like flushing the toilet. The kind of next step of that, growing up on a boat, there's a reasoning for it. My dad was a small space, off the grid, provide for yourself kind of a thinker. And so there was a lot of research when we were looking at, Dad wanted to build a small home for us to live in somewhere out in the San Juan Islands, probably on like Waldron Island or something. But a big part of Dad's research on that was, again, how do you be more efficient? Gray water, because then you have less water you need to haul, or you don't need as big of a well, or all kinds of other variabilities that go into sort of that math. So yeah, there's a lot of places in technology that we can adapt. There's systems that we can already add to existing homes and setups. They will require infrastructure, but there is hope in it. There are places that we can adapt. The thing that we talked about, however, though, with like human nature and the catastrophizing of the situation, right? Like, until it's imminent, it's going to be less likely. And the closer we get to it, the higher level of adoption until it's critical, and then it'll ramp up real quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, I mean, like we talked about earlier, I still think if you give people the choice, they will do the right thing. As long as you present to them, hey, this is happening. This is because I'll say this much, talking about the actual politics of the grief part of this podcast. I have seen recently some conservatives who were, I'll just graciously say, skeptical about climate change, even though you and I agree on what is happening and warming and all that. That we agree in the general consensus that things are warming and we need to do something about it. There is some conservative people out there that have been like, this is a hoax, blah, blah, blah. It seems like lately those people have become very quiet. And I don't think in a negative way.
You've mentioned that more than once.
I'm kind of surprised. Well, not surprised, but you do see them like, oh, okay, so I need to at least be open to this idea. Because they're living in places, some of the commentators I've seen, they're living in Texas. They're living in drier states.
More typically Southern America.
Some parts of Southern California.
Not South America.
Right.
Southern USA.
Yeah, Southern USA, yeah. So they're actually seeing, when you see it with your own eyes, or, then they get to the point where like, okay, so at least I'll listen to what we need to do, And I will say the idea of passing a law, even me being progressive, and I don't mind the government as much as you do. I don't want the government to say, these is exactly how much water you can use and whatever. Again, if you ask people and say, please reduce, and that was part of the National Review article, that over the years, the Colorado Basin area, people have been reducing the amount of water they're using. So if you just tell people, hey, just use less water, we're going to try to work on technology. Maybe it's a startup company. Like, we're going to shrink, like you said, gray water facilities so you can reuse stuff in your home. Like almost like a hot water tank of like, you have this facility that either desalinates water or
LA a couple years ago released a whole bunch of like floating black balls that they put out on a reservoir so that it would reduce the amount of gas off from the reservoir. Evaporation, because they were trying to conserve the amount of water that they had. Like, there's a lot of water is a thing that people are very aware of, particularly municipalities. Like, it's a big deal. And so a lot of research is going into it, and a lot of the solutions aren't complicated. but a lot of them
Yeah.
are. And one of the biggest ones we're running into is how water usage laws really impact it.
Yeah, like you said, it's if they're written 200 years ago.
And
or whatever,
I mean, that's why I brought it up earlier, right?
what?
Like
Yeah.
from the stance of our podcast being on the grief of politics, the grief in this one is long term. It's going to be, it's a less political issue in this sense of like conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat, and it's far more of a political issue in I need water for my constituents, and
Yeah. It's gonna be important.
I'm going to fight for it tooth and nail in the legislature, and there will have to be funding from governments, state, federal, local, to put in and invest in infrastructure to improve efficiencies.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it will have to happen at the federal level because the thing in Mississippi, a lot of people have brought up, they have the water problem there, the treatment facility broke, and they don't have clean drinking water because there was like a flight from that Jackson, Mississippi, and stuff. They don't have a tax base because people just left. So what the people that are left, what the state is able to tax at the local level isn't as much as if they brought people in. So then if you have less money, then you have less money for infrastructure. And although you and I believe differently about the inflation, I think it's a horrible name. I think you agree it's actually going to add inflation. But the infrastructure stuff in that bill is important to address these things that are happening in different
the stop inflation
states.
bill.
So,
Okay, I'm like, what? What are you talking about with inflation?
No, but yeah, that like you and I agree, it's a terrible name. But like there is infrastructure money in that bill to help local and state. So like if Mississippi's like we just don't have the tax base, or like Jackson especially, they can get relief from the bill of like we need X amount of dollars to fix our treatment facility or whatever. Yeah, I think unfortunately they may need federal money, and I know that may be a four-letter word to some conservatives of government, but I think infrastructure is one of those things we can all agree on is important. Just like like we just talked about, water is important, and if that affects your infrastructure, then take the government money. If they're going to give you money to fix,
what's the function of government, right? Like, provide basic services is a good starting point. Now you can make the libertarian argument for privatizing that, and then you can make the counter argument for government, right? Like, I think you and I talked about the documentary on Netflix about 3 Mile Island, and at the end of it, the guy ends the whole thing by basically saying like private companies with a profit model shouldn't be the ones doing this.
Right. That's actually happening to some utility companies with water too. Like, and fracking, I mean, that actually has to do with water. When oil companies frack, they take fresh water from people without permits. And they do, I mean, it's been in the news. Water supplies have been affected by fracking. Where, there's a very famous clip that came out a year ago where a guy lived on land, went to a city council meeting, and the oil company, the natural gas company was like, oh yeah, your water's totally fine. And he brought water in from his well that was like dark, like literal gray water, and said, okay, if you think this is good, then drink it. Like literally poured it in the meeting and said, drink it if you think this is safe water to drink. So
yeah, which, that's a whole nother water issue, right? Like, regulating drilling and other infrastructure stuff that impacts wells and streams and rivers that are also used to grow crops and drinking water, other stuff that we use in our homes.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a documentary years ago where it happens a lot. Well, some of the documentary was focused on Canada because they were Canadian filmmakers, but there was a lot talking about fracking and how a lot of those companies don't get permits, and then they just start taking water. They start taking water from rivers and everything because natural gas companies, because they're privatized, sometimes they don't have to get permits to do what they do. They just go do it.
That being privatized or being government really makes no difference in your need to get a permit. That's just bad policy the way it's written if they don't need to get a permit to get water. That seems so weird that they can just take water.
Well, they get a permit to drill. they get a permit. I mean, it was an old documentary, but they were saying basically they get a permit to drill in a place or whatever. But since the water right is like first come first serve everywhere, then they're just like, okay, well this is our water too because we're a public.
Yeah,
whatever.
It's
it
a
was
weird
like it was
weird
a long time ago
policy
like,
thing that doesn't. Yeah, I'd have to watch the documentary. Anyway, right? Like that's just another area, and I think in particular of all the topics that we've talked about, right? Like this water one is an area where the grief associated is broad and heavy because not having water is life or death. It's like not having air. Right, like it impacts so many people. I go back to the agricultural aspect of it. I've watched several different Netflix documentaries that have talked about water. Maybe it's just one in particular where it talked about water, like all around the world, not just in the United States, and farming and how it impacts things, and how like farmers are like struggling to feed their families and to keep their crops going that they've had in their families for generations, and not being able to stay with the farm, having to sell out of it because they just can't grow crops because they don't have enough water, and then vice versa. The most recent documentary I watched, they were talking about a large multinational corporation had moved into the South American country and was growing crops. I believe it was avocados. And the way the government worked, this company basically bought the water rights for this whole area. And so now these villages that were there beforehand have to truck in their water and pay to have water trucked in to water towers because they can't use the water from their own streams and rivers that they've used for generations because these large corporations have bought the farmland and bought all the water rights.
Bought the water rights. Yeah, I mean that's the rub right there is the who has control.
And it's going to stay that way. I mean, there's a reason that there was a James Bond movie where the whole thing was about stealing water.
Yeah, it wasn't Elon Musk. There was some other rich person that brought that up, that like water is going to be the thing. Maybe it was Musk. Somebody brought up the fact that water is actually going to be more important than oil.
Well, eventually we won't need oil the way that we need oil now, right? Like we're transitioning away from it. So
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, we're getting to the hour mark, so Evan. So, what do you? So we already. What are you going to talk about next?
Yeah. Week? So in discussing this particular topic, it reminded me very much of something that I think also is related. There's definitely more political contention on this topic, which is the looming energy crisis. The looming energy crisis that we're seeing in the United States and throughout the rest of the world. And I want to talk about that.
I do want to talk about that. Yeah. I'm reading this, like we just talked about Matt Undecided for about a good 5 to 7 minutes in this. And he talks a lot about, gathering energy, and some of that is dams and some of that is solar. And like we bring, like you brought up, I mean, really quickly, like you'll probably send articles to me about it, but yeah, I do want to convert to electric somehow, but like you said, that's going to strain the grid that already we're seeing. Hey, if this lake, these reservoirs drop, they're going to have to turn off the turbines that power the whatever. So like, how are you going to get power to these people? How are you going to charge your electric car? You're not going to be able to if you don't have a power.
I think it's really in the news at the moment too, because like in conservative media, you've got a lot of pundits, hosts, writers talking about the whole irony of California banning electric cars and like less than a month later having to ask people to stop using electricity because of brownouts or to cut down. So it super highlights the fact that we aren't building new power plants in our country. Renewables, we can't build it fast enough to make up for what we're losing. And then now we're putting all this additional strain of electric vehicles onto the grid. We already are tight on electricity.
Well, you and I are both in agreement. I mean, we'll talk about it in the episode, but I am okay with, I'm not one of those people that's like anti-nuclear. In fact, I think it's going to be necessary. and we may bring up another Matt Undecided video. Maybe we'll talk about it, but I said in a video a while ago where he talked about mini nuclear plants, which I thought was fascinating, instead of these broad ones. You could do them like per neighborhood or district or whatever, and we'll probably have to talk about that since we're already talking about him in this episode and we like him so much. And he talks about energy a lot, and we're going to talk about energy next month, so yeah, I think we'll definitely have to talk about it then. But Avin, what else do you want to plug since we're getting?
So same as always. Just plug my YouTube channel, Your Agent Guide, where I talk about just general real estate information, market updates, tips for buyers and sellers in the real estate market, real estate news. I am a realtor as well, so you have youragentguide.com. You can get to know my business there.
Yeah, you had an open house like
what was that?
A few weeks ago. So yeah, you had an open house.
I've had several open houses over the last several weeks.
Well, that's the one you called me, so I know about that one because you actually called me from that one. So I was like, hey, there's one.
Yep, and I mean, and want to talk about something that's got some grief going on. Oh man, the real estate industry has been super crazy and interesting this last year.
Yeah, that, we might talk about that. I'll put that on the list because there is grief in that. People want to buy homes. They don't want to rent forever. The way the markets work with the fluidity of, can I ever afford a house? I don't know. Well, you sent me, I think that article you sent me a day ago was about, I think, interest rates, wasn't it? Basically, or inflation or something. But I have seen there was an article from, I think, the National Review or a conservative magazine saying, hey, everybody getting a home idea, the American dream is kind of dead, just the way the markets are. And who can afford it?
And I actually want to do a video on Your Agent Guide, probably sometime in the near future with that specific topic of I want to own a home, but there's no way I can ever afford it because I think a lot more people can afford to own than think about it or that think they can because of programs that are out there and available. And no, not everyone will ever be able to buy a home, but I think more people can.
Well, I mean, I would like
to
talk about. I think it is, yeah. And I wrote that I'm keeping a tally here. So yeah, so go to Your Agent Guide. I'm actually behind a couple of your videos I need to watch. I think the last one you said the one that was. Might be a hot topic of should you buy a home or do you need to or the exact title, but is owning a home a good or a bad investment? That's actually not the title of the video, but basically it's owning a home is a bad investment, but you should still do it. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think the only thing I want to plug really quickly is this Gaming with Grief.
Yep.
I do it every week as opposed to every month like this is. And if you guys want to write to us, go to gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Just go there. Tell us what episode you're asking a question about or comment about. This is episode 21 on water. You can tell Avner and I how wrong we are and link some articles. We will link the articles of what we talked about. This will go up on YouTube the same day that these go up on the 20th of every month. The audio the video for this will go up on YouTube with the links to the articles. I will also add the Matt Undecided. I will get his last name, I swear, in the description if he talks about it. I just know him as Matt Undecided. I'll put that on there. I'm trying to think of anything else. I'm trying to. There was one other. I might have you on the gaming pod. There was something big gaming thing that came up that actually had to do with politics. I think what it might be is mergers in the gaming thing. The Blizzard, we talked about the downside of the Blizzard Activision thing, but right now there's continued scrutiny with the deal because obviously there's Activision Blizzard is a massive company that has a lot of IP, and there's been some kind of stuff publicly between Sony and Microsoft and privately, and I guess some regulators in the UK, because they have to look at it around the world, obviously, are looking at the deal. There's more scrutiny to the deal than originally, because everybody's like, oh, it's going to go through, and now it's like, yeah, it's still going to go through, but it's not as strong as before because, as a gaming aside, Call of Duty is a massive franchise, and technically, in everything, Microsoft would own Call of Duty, so Sony's thing is this is a massive thing, that's a total monopoly on the market, and Microsoft's going, yeah, but you own other stuff, and I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to talk about the actual transactional, what's going to happen and stuff. And I've seen some legal videos on from lawyers that do trade stuff that have actually, gaming, have talked about this may not be as cut and dry as everybody thought. So that'll probably be the next couple weeks, though. So thanks for everybody that's joining us, that's watching this on YouTube. Please like, subscribe to the videos, get the notifications. They always say ring the bell. I've never heard the bell ring. I've just click the notification thing, and I get a notification when stuff comes up. So there's no actual ring on mine unless I have notifications offers. I don't know. But yeah, do all this stuff. We will talk to you guys next month when we talk about the energy crisis. Everybody have a good month, and goodbye.